I've got one final take here to divulge, and it sort of surrounds this because, there was, as I just pointed out, national college football media member not giving any respect to Big 12, ACC, Indiana, anybody not one of the top brands or just the SEC as a whole. You're going to need somebody to stand up for you. And that guy is Brett Yormark. Brett Yormark continues to stand up and stand tall for the Big 12. If the league doesn't get a top 4 spot in the playoff, if it is Boise State that winds up with that bye, it's not going to be for a lack of trying from Brett Yormark. He's pulling all the strings he has, and he actually took a page out of Nick Saban's book with the way that he is fighting right now for the league. So the fight for a minute, if you will recall, was not just about, hey, can we get a first-round bye? It actually had devolved for the conference into, all right, can we even get into this thing at all when you were worried about Tulane or the week before Army? Now, that turned out to be silly, thankfully, because Army got just decleated by Notre Dame, and then Tulane got handled pretty well at home by Memphis. So they kind of laid an egg. Don't have to worry about that anymore. The Big 12 champion is going to be in this thing. Plus, you had the Big 12 winning out, like all 4 favorites, won out. So you're good. You're clear. And Yormark looks smart for not even addressing that part of it, because when that was going on a couple of weeks ago and Yormark kind of started this push, you were hearing him attack and talk about Boise. You were not hearing him talk about what was going on with the other G5s and can we even get in. He didn't address that. That was beneath him, too far below. Just smart. Because now, if you would have done that, it's just like giving that credence. You don't need to give that credence. And I say that understanding like I was somebody arguing and fighting for it because, I felt like it was the duty at that point to point it out and point out how ridiculous it would be. But Brett Yormark doing it officially as the conference, no, you don't need to do that. But Boise is a real legitimate problem. And not getting that bye is a real legitimate problem that Brett Yormark has felt like addressing, and he has done it. Boise is 5 spots above anybody in the Big 12 in the last college football playoff rankings. We'll see if Arizona State, having a more impressive win over a similar opponent, can close any ground on them this week. I doubt that it's going to be much, if anything, at all. And I don't think that anything happening in the Big 12 championship, blowing out Iowa State, I don't know if any of that would be enough to actually bridge that gap with Boise if Boise were to win. Maybe you can dream up a scenario for me where it's like a very tight Boise win, last second Boise win, and you get Iowa State to lose by 4 touchdowns to Arizona State or something. I think highly unlikely. Or, you can flip that on its head. The reason I use Arizona State there is because they're higher in the playoff rankings right now than Iowa State. So they would be conceivably closer. But you have a hard time jumping them. But Brett Yormark is not giving up. Yormark is not giving up. He went on the Iowa State K-State broadcast, Farmageddon broadcast on Saturday, and talked to the broadcast crew, which I love that move. Middle of the game, he comes out and states his case. Says the committee needs to spend more time thinking about strength of schedule. I'm really focused on that. He says 82% of our opponents are Power 4, and we've won 71% of those games. That leads all FBS. There's a lot of parity, but you think about the Power 4 across all the major conferences, there's a lot of parity there as well. If you think about Texas coming from the Big 12 and leading the SEC. If you think about Oregon, they didn't even win the Pac-12 last year, and they're leading the Big 10. Not only is there parity across our conference, I think there is across the Power 4. But to me, it comes down to strength of schedule, and I think we need the committee to focus on that a little bit more. So, Joey McGuire also made this same point that Brett Yormark did up there. Joey McGuire took his time at the podium to say, basically, look what's happening in the ACC. SMU going from the American to the ACC looks like they may well win this thing. They will be playing for the conference championship. Texas, they're playing for the SEC conference championship after coming from the Big 12. Oregon, they're playing for the Big 10 championship after coming from the Pac-12. And Arizona State, they're playing for a Big 12 championship after coming from the Pac-12, which reinforces the idea that there's a lot of parity everywhere. And there's not just dominant conferences that should be like running away with everything. Reinforces the idea that there's parity out there. We should not be giving conferences like the SEC some kind of crazy preferential treatment, and that you need to just evaluate things based on strength of schedule, because that's one of the easier ways to do it when you have so much variance in what's happening and teams on the move and leading other conferences. But the bigger point to me here is just that Brett Yormark's pulling all the strings that he can for this. One, just a general idea, and this has been a theme with me for Yormark the entire time. I just love how the guy fights. Guy fights for the league. He's not going to give up, and he's not going to go quietly into the night, and he's still doing it. But also, this is a very Nick Saban-like move. I love a guy who can pull like a Nick Saban card here, because remember 2 years ago, 2022, Saban is upset that he doesn't get into the playoff. That Bama team got left out of the playoff, had to go play K-State in the Sugar Bowl. And, you know, he still, by the way, complains about it. And TCU, even though TCU beat Michigan, he still complains about it. But Nick Saban got on TV that night during conference championship weekend on ESPN, and they were throwing him out there to just publicly state his case. He's just on the stump, like on ESPN. And they gave him that platform. They were happy to platform Nick Saban to do that. Well, Brett Yormark said, hey, Fox, get out of the way and let me go to work. And he got Fox to platform him to go make that case. Is that making any kind of legitimate impact? Probably not anything crazy, but it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. And I love that he's out there doing it. And Nick Saban certainly thought it was important enough to do 2 years ago. So maybe it has some level of effect. If you get enough people talking about it, it's not just Yormark's comments, but if he does that and then fans hear it, other broadcasters hear it, and it becomes more a part of the discourse, maybe then it does begin to have some influence. I'm just glad that Brett Yormark is on the Big 12 side. He also did this, if you want to talk about strings that he pulled with ESPN. Heartland College Sports, shout out to that crew. They had a great report that says Heartland College Sports has learned from sources that Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark called ESPN personally and, quote, put a lot of pressure on the network to fix the way they spoke about and showcase the Big 12 conference. This seemingly in the aftermath of what Desmond Howard did a couple of weeks ago. You saw my video on the channel about that. Desmond Howard looking at the Arizona game on the rundown, the Arizona State game, Arizona State K-State game, and saying, like, why are we picking this? Why was this even on the outline? Just talking down to the league and ushering it off as something completely not important. Well, since then, there's been a little bit of a shift, right? You had Nick Saban going on a nice little positive rant here about how much he loves Cam Scatterbo. He said, that's got to be my favorite player in college football, man. The guy is rugged and tough. I just love a great competitor, and he's all that. Desmond Howard did issue like some form of an apology when we next saw him on air too. So clearly somebody got in Desmond Howard's ear, and apparently it was Brett Yormark who started all that by hopping on the phone and being like, hey, business partner who was going to broadcast the game later that night that your guy crapped all over, how about you don't do that? How about you shape up a little bit? Remember, man, 2021, July 2021, how wild the narratives were. Stuart Mandel was out here throwing heinous TV numbers out there that he would never fully backtrack and apologize on, even though he more or less admitted that he was wrong or misleading about. That was the type of stuff that was happening. People saying like, oh, man, if you look at the Hateful Eight TV numbers, they're actually like basically as bad or worse than the American. And there's no way. How will these teams ever get, he projected like a quarter of what they wound up getting for their TV deal. That was the stuff that was happening when nobody was out there trying to fight it. Now the Big 12 is. I can't remember if I've talked about this here or not, if this happened since the last live show, but you had the tweet that the Big 12 conference actually sent out there in response to the comments that at this point, I think it was in response to Saban, going after Saban, not the Kiffin comments, but the Saban comments. And they quote tweeted it when he had said, like, Ole Miss, throw Ole Miss in the Big 12. What would their record be? And the Big 12 quote tweets it and throws up the score bugs of 3 Ole Miss losses to Big 12 teams that have happened the last 3 times they've played them. So I love that you got a conference doing that, man. They're trying to control it. They're trying to control the narrative as much as possible. And to the extent that you can, you might as well do it. I love Brett Yormark for that. I love the entire attitude of the league for that. And I thought we saw more of that this weekend. How much will it pay dividends this year? It probably doesn't really matter because it's going to be either Boise loses and everything is great, or Boise doesn't, and Big 12 fans will be left here to unfortunately complain and try and continue to fight for their better spot at the college football table. It is what it is. See where it goes, but I like the man that's in charge. I'll tell you that much.